And I think we're live. Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. For those new here, my name's Nikki. I'm an author and editor and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading and all the other things I love. And we're here for reading today because it is the end of the month and it's time to wrap up on all the books I've been reading during March. So now I've given you the intro, let me just get that banner out the way. There we go. I've got about 30 books to go through, so it's going to take a while and I shall try and not be too wordy and verbose about it. To that end, I'm going to kick straight off. Now, this first book I'm starting with was actually one I read in February, and I had it all written down on the list that I was going to talk about it in February's stream, and then I managed to skip over it. So I shall mention it briefly now. It's The Mercies by Kiran Millwood Hargrave. This is a book I received as an ARC from the publisher, and it's historical fiction based loosely on real events. There was a terrible storm up in this remote little island community in Scandinavia, and it killed off most of the male population of this village. And so the women had to kind of take over and do things for themselves in order to survive. However, a priest is then sent along to get things back in line because these women shouldn't be this independent, and what ends up being a lengthy witchcraft trial. So I can't say too much more without spoiling, but this was a 4-star read for me. I thought the story was quite gripping. I liked the characters, and all in all, if you are a fan of historical fiction, then this will be one you will enjoy. Excuse me, I feel like I'm going to sneeze at any moment, so apologies if I keep rubbing my nose. Next up, I read a Japanese classic, The Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki. This was a 4-star read for me as well. This is quite a fun story. It's based around a young prince called Genji, and he's a bit of a womanizer, a bit of a lad about town, if you like. And the story kind of follows many of his exploits, particularly the romantic ones. He's not in some ways a completely likable character. I mean, he really manipulates the women and uses them and discards them and various things, but it was a really fun read, and it looks a lot at the sort of politics of the period within the imperial court. So historically it's interesting as well. Moving on, as I said, I will try and be a bit brief today because I've got so many to get through. The next one I read was Anthropocene Rag by Alex Irvine. This was a 3.5-star read for me. This is a book I got from NetGalley, and I was trying to think how to describe it to you, and it's very difficult. So I'm actually just going to read you the blurb because it probably says it better than I would. In the future United States, our own history has faded into myth, and travelling across the country means navigating wastelands and ever-changing landscapes. The country teems with monsters and artificial intelligences try to unpack their own becoming by creating myths and legends of their human creators. Prospector Ed, an emergent AI who wants to understand the people who made him, assembles a ragtag team to reach the mythical Monument City. In this nanotech western, Alex Irvine infuses American myth-making with terrifying questions about the future and who we will become. Now, as I said, this was a 3.5-star read for me. I found it a really hard book to review and decide how I felt about it because I really loved the premise, and there were lots of moments of really great humour and fun and entertainment in the story. But when the book finished, I was left questioning what on earth it had actually been about. The narrative voice was kind of off-putting, but the concept was really fresh and original. So if you're looking for something completely different on a sci-fi kind of side of things, then it's worth checking out. It's a very quick and quirky little read, but it just didn't thrill me. I'm sorry, that is my stomach rumbling now. I actually haven't had any breakfast yet. I really apologise. Hopefully it's not going to be audible on the stream. Moving along anyway, another NetGalley read, The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Niveau. Hopefully I've said that right. This was another very quick read. It's just sort of just over 100 pages, a novella-length story. High fantasy-ish, if you can call such a short work high fantasy, about a young queen or a young woman who's said to be a queen. So she has to leave her home in the north and move south to make a political marriage. Everyone in the court is essentially against her. She befriends a handmaiden who has been sold into palace service by her family because they couldn't afford to pay their tithes, and they kind of form this close friendship. I can't really say too much more. As I said, it's a fairly short story. I don't want to spoiler it. I enjoyed the way the tale unfolded. This storytelling style was really spellbinding and entertaining and gripping. In fact, I would have liked to have seen this story extended and made a bit longer, because I felt I could have spent more time with the characters than I actually was allowed to. It has an LGBT angle within the story as well. So if you like fantasy, LGBT, something a little bit different, Empress of Salt and Fortune might interest you. Moving along. I've got to scan down my list. I'll have on the next one. Wayward Heroes by Halldór Laxness, one of my favourite Icelandic authors. Now, this is a work of his which it's different from some of his other works in that it's kind of a retelling of several linked sagas, so as opposed to a completely original story. However, it's not a simple retelling / translation. Laxness actually has kind of flipped the story a bit so that the main male characters, who are presented as heroes essentially in the saga, are seen from a different point of view in this book, with some of their worst deeds highlighted more than the heroic ones, because often in the sagas the heroes actually do some quite dodgy things as well, and it's that aspect that's kind of highlighted. We see them through different eyes in this retelling. That is my stomach again, I'm so sorry. This was a 5-star read for me. I think Laxness really captured the feel of the saga storytelling in his prose. And it was, although I kind of knew the story because I've read the sagas in translation already, it was really fascinating to see them from this other point of view and look at events from a different angle. So if you're new to Laxness, this is maybe not the best one to start with, unless you're already a saga fan and you just fancy seeing the sagas from a different point of view. Then it's definitely worth reading. If you haven't read Laxness before, there's probably other works of his I'd recommend starting with. If you're already a fan of his work, then definitely check out Wayward Heroes. Another arc I received, an e-arc from the publisher, On Wilder Seas by Nicki Marmery. This was a 3.5-star read for me. This is historical fiction, and it's based loosely on real events of a woman who ended up travelling with Francis Drake on the Golden Hind. Obviously, there's not a lot of historical detail available about her, so a great amount of this is fantasy and fiction, if you like. But it was a fun story in the end, but I never really came to care about the characters deeply. That's why I only gave it 3.5 stars, because I really wished I could have formed a greater connection with some of the principal characters than I did. Next up, an arc I received from the publisher, The Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood. So this is a standalone fantasy novel. In this story, we meet, I'm going to try and pronounce her name, trying to remember how it was pronounced in the pronunciation guide in the book, Xorwe, I think it was. She is a follower of one of the gods, the Shrine of the Unspoken she works at, and she has been chosen to be a sacrifice to the god. However, on the day that she's meant to climb up into the mountain and be sacrificed, a powerful mage who is visiting the shrine suggests that she runs away with him instead. So she leaves home and becomes the wizard's, I guess, aid in some ways. She kind of learns how to wield a sword. She's a spy. She steals things. And she's helping him try to reclaim his seat of power in his homeland from whence he was exiled. However, things take a bit of a turn, and she discovers she's not as free from her past as she thought she was. I don't want to say too much more than that. This was a 4-star read for me. It is an enjoyable fantasy story. I liked the premise. I thought the characters were engaging. There's LGBT content in this story too, and I thought that was integrated nicely in a really natural way into the story without it taking over as the primary focus. And the book moved at a pretty good pace, and the characters were well developed. So I enjoyed the world building as well, was really well done. There was no major info dumping. It all flowed quite naturally through the prose. And yeah, overall, I would definitely read more by this author because I thought it was a really solid novel. Next up, where am I up to? Devil's Ballast by Meg Caddy. This is a book I got from NetGalley, and it's another Women at Sea book. Actually, I read 2 Women at Sea books this month. This one is about the famous female pirate Anne Bonny. This was a 4-star read for me. I thought the story was entertaining. I liked the portrayal of Anne. I thought she came across really well as a character, and you really felt for her. Again, you know, we only know so much from history, so a fair amount of this is from the author's imagination, but I thought it all wove quite seamlessly through the story. And if you like historical fiction with sort of swashbuckling female leads, then Devil's Ballast is one for you. Sticking with NetGalley, I also read Conception. Now I'm going to try and pronounce this author's name. I'm not very good at Turkish pronunciation, so apologies. Özgür Uyanik. And this was a 4-star read for me as well. This is a really fascinating piece of literary fiction. It's about an artist who he's kind of reached a bit of a stale point in his career until he suddenly has an amazing concept idea for art, which he is going to try to use to reboost his flagging popularity, if you like, and make his name known. He decides to eat his own kidney. And so this is the story we kind of see. It's a very sort of deep internal narrative from him as we see him work through his thoughts, his feelings about what he's doing. It's really hard to know how to describe this book, and I'm trying not to spoil it too much in the process. This is not going to appeal to everyone. Perhaps it's best to say that. Some people might find it a bit too icky for their liking, but if you can stomach it, it is a really fascinating work looking at this the sort of devolving psyche of this guy as he struggles to come to terms with who he is and what he wants. And I'm just really, like, I don't want to give away anything important as I talk about it. I'm trying really hard not to. It's quirky, it's different, a little bit in sometimes, as I've said. So if that sounds like your sort of thing and you want something completely out there to read, Conception is worth taking a look. It's a very short book. Next up, The Nose and Other Stories by Gogol. Now, I've only read Dead Souls by Gogol before, so I was really keen to read some of his short stories, for which he's very well known, and I really enjoyed them. 4.5 stars for me. If you haven't read Dead Souls, this might be a nice introduction to Gogol's style. If you have, I definitely recommend checking out these short stories as well. There's a great element of magical realism through a lot of them, particularly some of the earlier stories. They're presented roughly in sort of the order he wrote them. And that magical realism disappears a little bit as time goes on, but certainly in the early stories, it's really prevalent. And they're great fun, really quirky, entertaining tales. Quirky is my word of the month. I think everything's quirky I read this month, sorry. Next up is a book I received as an e-arc, and it's Handsome Death by Sarah Dobie Bauer. This is an paranormal story, and Ethan, our main character, is a vampire hitman, and then he meets a human called Tristan, who he falls in love with and wants to protect, but also finds himself starting to stalk him. I can't say too much more because I don't want to give away the twist in the story and what happens, but it was a really entertaining and engaging read. I loved Ethan and Tristan as characters. They came across well. I really enjoyed their interactions. And there was a good balance in the story between the action and the plot, and having some steamy sex scenes and emotional moments as well. So if you're looking for an paranormal tale that's nicely balanced pieced with a good plot but still some heat along the way, then check out Handsome Death. I don't know if I said, did I say I gave it 4 stars? So excuse me, because I'm just going to need to blow my nose. Okay. So, moving on, sticking to NetGalley for a little bit, I read two books that are first volumes in manga. The first one was RWBY Volume 1 by Bunta Kinami. This one was a 3.5-star read for me. I really enjoyed the premise of this story. I'd actually seen adverts for the anime on Crunchyroll, so I was interested to find out a bit more about it. And I liked the premise, but at the same time, it didn't completely grip me, the tale. I didn't fall in love with the characters, and I didn't really like the art style either. I found it felt a little bit unfinished to me. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I just wasn't in love with the style of the illustration. So if you are really into fantasy adventure stories, then it's worth checking out. But it wasn't one that really gripped me that I desperately want to read on in. The next one, sticking with manga, but this time contemporary story, Komi Can't Communicate, Volume 1 by Tomohito Oda. And this is a story set in a high school in which there's a girl who is considered the ice princess of the class. However, she... sorry, I'm just... something's just flashed up on my screen, distracted me for a second. However, she is actually not an ice princess. She's actually incredibly shy and just doesn't know how to talk to people. And one of the boys in her class realizes this, and together they form a friendship, and he decides to try to help her make friends and overcome her shyness. I thought this was a really sweet story. I gave it 4 stars. I definitely finished the first volume thinking that I would be interested to read on and find out what happens to these characters. So from that point of view, it was definitely an entertaining read. And moving on to an arc I received from the publisher, The Animals at Lockwood Manor. Sorry, my nose is still running. 1 second. Sorry about that. It's just these early mornings are getting quite cool now as our weather changes, and I just end up with a runny nose for the first hour or so of the day every morning at the moment. It's okay, I haven't got coronavirus or anything yet. So, The Animals at Lockwood Manor by Jane Healy. This one was a 3.5-star read for me. This is historical fiction. It's set during the Second World War, and the basic premise is that these taxidermy animals, these stuffed animals from one of the London museums, have been moved into this country house to keep them safe in case of bombing. However, it turns out this place is not quite as safe as the young museum curator expected. She's a woman. She's been upgraded in her position because all the men are off fighting, but the rest of the staff don't really trust her. They don't think a woman can do the job. And she's desperate to prove them wrong and do a good job looking after these animals. So it is very perturbing for her when a few start going missing, and other factors such as vermin and that are threatening the survival of these pieces. At the same time, there seems to be a mystery going on in the house. There's a mysterious woman in white who's been sighted, and there's some strange things going on with the father and daughter who live in the property. I can't say too much more than that. For me, there was a lot of potential here, but the story, it felt like it was using Gothic tropes just because it wanted to be a Gothic story, and they didn't always feel natural. They kind of felt forced in now and again, and a little bit overdone, I suppose, is the way to describe it. I had a lot of high expectations, and it just didn't quite hit the mark on some of them for me. But if you enjoy history with a bit of a mystery element involved, then it's worth checking out for sure. Next up are 3 books, all by Japanese authors, that I borrowed from the library. The first is If Cats Disappeared from the World, by Karamura Genki. I adored this story. It's a 5-star read for me. I thought it was super cute, quirky and fun. Quirky again, you see, it's my quirky month, obviously March. The basic premise of this story is a postman discovers that he's got a terminal illness, and he literally has a few days to live at most. It's a very sudden thing. He's not prepared for it. And then a figure comes to him claiming to be the devil, who offers him an opportunity to extend his life. He can live for an extra day, but for each day he lives, he has to remove something from the world. So He tries removing various things for several days, and we see how that impacts him and how much his memories of friends and family are connected around these items that he thought he could do without. I don't want to give too much away, but it was a really interesting premise, something really different, and it came across so well, and I love the prose style, and I would definitely read more by this author. Next up, Strange Weather in Tokyo by Kawakami Hiromi. This one was a 4-star read for me. This again is a slightly quirky story in some ways, but essentially it's a young woman who's a little bit reclusive, but she ends up meeting her former teacher in a bar, and they develop this friendship/romance. And we see the progression of that through the story. I thought this worked really well. I loved the characters, and I loved the slow, subtle development of their relationship throughout the book as well. I kind of had somewhere I hoped it was going, and I was kind of always on the edge of my seat waiting to see if that would eventuate or not. It was really well done, and I definitely, again, read more by this author. And finally, The Guest Cat by Hiraide Takashi. And this one was a 3-star read for me. Another cat book. They love their cat books in Japan, and I've read some really awesome cat books. But this one just didn't capture me in quite the same way. Let me just have a quick drink. I think where this novel went wrong, there wasn't enough cat in it. And that may seem a really weird thing to say, but for a book essentially about a cat who this family kind of semi-adopt, even though he belongs to the neighbours, I wanted to see more of the cat, because the book is all about their relationship with him and how that relationship could be perceived by other people, insofar as it's a kind of theft that the cat comes to their house when he doesn't belong to them. And there's a lot of Japanese cultural things going on in this book as well, which you have to have a bit of an understanding of to follow the story and why people are reacting the way they are. But there should have been like 100% more cat. And then the book would have been better, I think. As I said, I didn't hate it, but it didn't capture my imagination and fill me with enjoyment in the way that some of these other cat books have, such as the If Cats Disappeared from the World or the Travelling Cat Chronicles that I read a little while back. So I've just got a pen all over my arm. Everything's going wrong today. My nose is running, my stomach's rumbling, I'm getting pen all over my arm. I'm really sorry, but it's just one of those days, I think. I shall move on anyway and tell you about The World of Wolf Hall by Sam Binney. This book I was given free when I bought a copy of The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel this month in Dimmicks, and it's basically a catcher-upper, because obviously Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies are pretty hefty tomes. And this is the book you read if you don't want to have to reread them, but you can't remember what happened in the story. And I thought it's a 4-star for me. I thought it was a really nice summary of everything that happened to bring you up to date, a reminder of the characters. It also talked a bit about the history and about the cultural impact of these stories that the first 2 parts have had so far. And yeah, so if you are a reader of this trilogy, the Wolf Hall trilogy, and you want a catch-up before you start The Mirror and the Light, then The World of Wolf Hall is definitely worth your time. I'm currently reading Mirror and the Light, and I will have my review of that for you at the end of April. So moving back to NetGalley, I've got a book called Let's Talk in Traveling Japanese by Nihongo Inc. and Iroriko. Iroriko did the illustrations for the story, or for the book, sorry. This was a really, really strange book. I've given it 3 stars, but I honestly didn't know what to make of it, because from the blurb, it sounded like it was aimed at people who were fairly new to learning Japanese and wanted to pick up useful vocabulary for traveling in Japan, which I thought, this is perfect for me. I've been studying Japanese, about 6-7 months now. And it's at a sort of low intermediate level, I would say now. And I thought maybe I'll pick up some really useful vocabulary and perhaps a bit more grammar information and things from this book. When I opened it, I discovered the book was written entirely in Japanese. Now, if it's aimed at beginners or intermediate readers, I could read some of it, but I could not read all of it. I would have had to sit there with a kanji dictionary for hours trying to make sense of some of the stuff where I didn't know the kanji. And so I wondered who on earth the book was aimed at, because if it's aimed at people visiting Japan, if their Japanese is good enough to be able to read this book in Japanese, then surely they don't need to know travel vocabulary for visiting Japan. They would know the vocabulary already if they could read this book. So I was really confused about who the intended audience were. From what I could make out, it did include some basic information about hiragana and katakana and things like that. So in some ways I felt it was aimed at beginners, but beginners would not be able to read it to understand what they're being taught. So I think I gave it 3 stars because I thought there probably was some useful information in there, but it's only going to be available to you if your Japanese is already pretty good. Your reading of Japanese, I should say, is already pretty good, because you need to be able to read the kanji. So it was really strange. Anyway, I don't know who they thought this book was going to be bought by and read by, because I really thought if you can read this book, then you do not need the book. But that's just me, maybe, but it was just bizarro. Next up, borrowed from the library, Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells. So this is the 3rd book in the Murderbot series. And this one was a 4.5-star read for me. I adored book 1, but book 2 I only found okay. I didn't love it as much. However, book 3 really caught my interest again. I enjoyed the story and the plot line of this one a lot more than the second one. So it really caught me back up in Murderbot's world again, and left me keen to find out what will happen in book 4. And of course, we have the new novel-length work coming out not quite next month, May. I did have book 4 on request at the library, but there's a bit of a waiting list. And because of everything going on with coronavirus at the moment, I've actually suspended my hold for now, because we probably shouldn't be passing books and things around at present. So I will come back and try and read it in a few months' time. I'll cancel the suspension on the hold and request it again. And then hopefully I can read the full-length novel as well. But if you haven't read any of the Murderbot books, I definitely recommend checking them out. They're awesome fun. You have to start with the first one, because although in some ways the stories are self-contained, they do rely on you having some knowledge of Murderbot's progression through the books. So definitely start at number 1. Next up, I read The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by Mishima Yukio. Mishima Yukio is a novelist from Japan, 20th century novelist I have discovered just in the last few months. This is it the 2nd or 3rd of his I've read? I think it's only the 2nd. I've got another one to read soon. I really love his work. This one I gave, what did I give this one? 4 stars. I didn't love it as much as Thirst for Love, but that's just because Thirst for Love really captured my interest very deeply. This one is a very different story, very different focus. In some ways, there's Lord of the Flies elements in it, because it's a group of boys, young boys, who do some things that are questionable. I'm trying not to spoiler it. I don't want to say too much, but our sort of main young boy is perturbed when his mother takes a new lover/husband after his father's death, and the man is a sailor. And at first the boy wants to worship and idolize him because he loves the sea and everything about boats. But then the sailor does some things that upset him. Not bad things. He's actually a really nice person, the sailor, on the whole. But the boy feels let down that the sailor has ruined this image of him that the boy had. And he and his friends begin to plot their revenge. This book is not going to appeal to everyone. They do some... don't want to spoil. I can't really say what they do without spoiling it. But let's say they do some things that are going to make some people feel a bit queasy, if you like. If that sort of thing doesn't bother you, then I definitely recommend this, because it was a fascinating read, a fascinating study of these characters. We sort of, the boy, his mother, and the sailor. We kind of hear from all of them. But if you're a bit squeamish about things, don't read this one. Maybe read Thirst for Love. That's not quite as icky. Next up, a book I received as an ARC from the publisher, The Sin Eater by Megan Campisi. This is historical fantasy, I think I'll call it. I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought it was a really fun book. the basic premise is it's set in a court that loosely resembles Elizabeth I's reign. And the history of the characters kind of incorporates Henry VIII type character. And in this world, there are sin eaters, and there are records historically of sin eaters, but they're fairly vague. So a lot of this is fiction, although there's a sense of history in there too. And our main character is accused of a crime. She's stolen some bread, and her punishment, they decide, is that she must become a sin eater. This means that when someone is dying or dies, she has to go and hear their confession. And based on what their sins are, certain foods, different foods for different sins, will be put on top of their coffin, which she then has to go and eat. And by eating them, she takes that person's sins into herself. So that person can go to heaven sin-free, if you like. Because of what she does, full of sin as she is, she's a bit of a social outcast now. And something is happening at the royal court during this story. A few people are dying and food is appearing on their coffins that does not mirror the confessions that she heard as the sin eater. They're being accused of other crimes that they didn't confess to. So there's a bit of a murder mystery kind of thing going on as well in the background there that she is trying to get to the bottom of. I won't say more because I don't want to spoiler it, but it was really enjoyable. If you like historical fiction and don't mind a bit of a fantasy element, definitely I recommend it. And if maybe you love fantasy and are not usually a historical reader, again, this might be a good bridging book for you because it's kind of a faux or alternate history, if you like. Next up are a few books that I bought for my new Korean studies. I started learning Korean this year, as well as the Japanese, which the Koreans I'm actually struggling with a little bit, and I think it's maybe because I'm still too deep in the Japanese, but I'm going to persevere, and it doesn't matter how fast I learn. I'm still going to give most of my time to Japanese, and I'll just do a little bit of Korean on the side. And once the Japanese is at a level where I feel I can dial back the amount of time I'm putting on it, then I'll work more on the Korean. So for now, I bought a few books anyway. So I got the Collins Korean Dictionary Essential Edition, which I gave 4 stars to. From where I've used it so far, it's reasonably good. There's a lot of modern terminology included, which is great. However, there's some things where I was looking up and the words I was looking for weren't in there. So I guess it's a bit of a toss-up. You've got a lot of modern vocabulary, but perhaps it's not covering as many general words as it could because of that. But as of just a beginner's dictionary, it's perfectly fine. I also got 500 Basic Korean Verbs by Park Kyo-byung. This was 4 stars. I think the verbs tables are nicely presented. It's fairly easy to read and follow, and just as a reference work, I think it will be useful. And finally, Essential Korean Grammar by Laura Kingdon. This was 4 stars for me. Now, this book, in the blurb, it suggests it's aimed at beginners and intermediate. However, I would say it's really more for intermediate. It does assume it's not telling you the really basic grammar, at least not in a, perhaps it's best to say it's not telling you the basic grammar in a learning environment kind of way. It's not taking you through things step by step. It's more of a reference work for double checking or looking up certain quirks with certain phrases and things like that. So I think it will prove useful, but perhaps not at this stage of my learning. It's one that will sit on the shelf for a while until I get a bit more advanced. We're nearly there. Whew. It's been a big one this month, hasn't it? We've got about 4 or 5 to go. So next up, the 3rd light novel for Bungo Stray Dogs by Asagiri Kafka. This is a 4-star read for me. What I enjoyed about this one compared to the first 2 light novels is that the first 2 were based on plot elements, bits of story that had taken place in the anime. So I already knew the stories. Whereas this one was completely new material to me, which just gave it a bit more interest because it was fresh and I didn't know what was coming. And this one tells the story of the formation of the Armed Detective Agency and how some of the initial characters who set up the agency first met. So it's really based highly around Rumpo. And it was really great fun. I loved the sort of murder mystery he ends up solving during the course of the story. And there was also a fun little bit included at the start too about how the Detective Agency members prepared for the entry exam for our main character in the usual main story. So definitely a lot to love here if you're a Bungo Stray Dogs fan. I don't think, with some of the others, you probably could read them even if you didn't know the manga or anime, but I think with this one it would definitely help if you were familiar with one or both of those. So next up, going back to NetGalley and to manga, I read a single standalone volume story called Mujirushi, and it was by Urasara Naoki. Can't read my own writing. This was a 4-star read for me. The basic premise of this story is a family, the father, mother, and daughter. The father makes some bad business decisions and essentially is looking at bankruptcy, and the mother runs off with someone else on a cruise. So the father and daughter are left alone, and he's worried about how he's going to make money. At which point he's approached by this eccentric gentleman who suggests that he goes to France and temporarily steals a painting from the Louvre, because this eccentric gentleman has painted a replica. And he said it won't be theft because we're going to give the painting back eventually. We just need it to disappear for long enough that he can sell his fake version as if it's the real thing and make them both a lot of money. So it's a bit of like a sort of comedic heist scenario, if you like. It was great fun. It held my interest. The characters were amusing and nicely portrayed. And as I said, 4 stars for me. It was a fun read, and it's a nice standalone one. So if you're not looking to get caught up in a huge ongoing volume after volume story, then this might be one you'd like to check out. Sticking with NetGalley, I read Earthlings by Murata Sayaka. Now, this was a 5-star read for me. This is a really fascinating book. It's hard to know how to describe it. It's literary fiction, but I guess there's a bit of magical realism in a way. It depends how you look at it. Essentially, though, it's commentary on society and on societal expectations and how those societal norms impact people who don't fit within those norms, the outsiders who find it difficult to conform to what society wants of them. And it's all tied up. There's a sort of sense of are they or aren't they aliens in the book, which is why I kind of mentioned magical realism, is it, isn't it kind of thing. This is not a story that's going to appeal to everyone. It takes some quite extreme turns, particularly towards the end, which might, I don't want to spoil them, but they might put off some readers. It goes into things like sexual molestation of a young girl by her teacher, and there's various quite dark themes running through it. So as I said, this is not going to appeal to everyone, so you might want to approach it with caution if you're someone who finds things like that triggering. But I thought it was a really wonderfully written piece. The prose style was brilliant. It was lyrical and dreamlike at times, and yet quite stark in other moments, and yet that flowed beautifully. It didn't feel jarring as you move between the two. And I actually felt quite a few things that I felt and thought myself were reflected in this novel, which is probably why it had extra resonance for me. And I would definitely read more by this author because I absolutely loved this story. Going back to NetGalley and to manga, I read volume 1 of Spy Time's Family by Endo Tatsuya. Now this is a 4-star read for me. This is a brilliant premise. It's a contemporary thriller/comedy, I'd say. Our main character is a spy, and for his latest mission, he needs to acquire a family. So he goes out and he adopts a young girl. However, the young girl is a telepath, which he doesn't realize. And he then meets a woman who might be a suitable pretend mother for the girl and wife for him, but he doesn't know that she's actually an assassin who's looking for her own cover in marrying or pretending to marry him. So we have now a family formed of a telepath, a spy, and an assassin. And they're all trying to keep their covers, and they don't know about the sort of background situations of the other. So it was really great fun. It was entertaining, humorous, and I would definitely go on and read more. I was left at the end wanting to know what would happen next to these characters. And final one, we're nearly there. Another NetGalley read, The Disaster Tourist by Yoon Cohen. This was fast starts for me. This is a South Korean writer. And the premise of this story is a young woman who works in a tourist office. She's felt recently that her co-workers are maybe alienating her, as if maybe she's about to be pushed out. And she's given the opportunity to take a break and go on one of the tourist office's own tours, which she does. However, when she gets to the location, she discovers that things there are not quite as she thought, and that something sinister is afoot. And this, in some ways, this is a social commentary story. Definitely it looks at the ideas of tourism, and particularly with organised tours, how what you see is not necessarily a true reflection of a place and its people, because it's all been sanitised and created specifically for the tourist. And it looks at things also like ecology. There's quite a few themes running through this novel. Sexual harassment at the workplace is another one. And again, I can't say too much about this story without spoiling it, so I'm not going to talk about the plot too much, but I found it enjoyable. I liked the characters. I thought the story came across well, and it kept me interested and wanting to keep turning the pages all the time. So definitely check it out if you're looking for something a little bit different in a literary fiction type read. So, we're there. It's taken nearly 45 minutes, but we've made it to the end of my March reads. I've still got quite a few books here. I think I've got 25 to 30 odd books lined up in my TBR pile at the moment. So I will be continuing to read through those during April, and we'll come back to you then with another update on what I thought about some of those, including, as I said, the End of the Wolf Hall trilogy, which I'm about 2/3 through at the moment, so I should finish it during April. It's just a little bit large to take to bed and read. It's too heavy and bulky, so I'm having to just read a few bits here and there when I've got 10-15 minutes spare in the afternoon, so that's why it's taking a little bit of time. But I will get through it, I will finish it, and I will share my thoughts at the end of April. So I will close there for now. Thanks for visiting with me again for this vlog. Hope you've maybe found a couple of potential new reads out of this big mass of books I got through during March. I've actually already finished half of my Goodreads goal for the year, even though we're only a quarter through the year. And I'm actually doing really well, perhaps I should mention quickly, on my personal reading goal, the NJM Book Challenge 2020. I actually have now found books within my TBR pile to cover all 25 categories. And I've read quite a few of them. I think I've got about 6 left. Let me just do a quick total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. So I've actually read 19 out of my 25 categories, and I have books lined up for the remaining 6. So I will get through those soon as well. In terms of my world reading challenge, I don't think I've added any more new ones this month. However, I have requested a couple on NetGalley that would cross off some more categories. So I just have to wait and see whether I am approved for them or not. But fingers crossed, maybe I'll get at least one of them and I can cross off another country from my list here. So I will close there for now, but I'll be back again during April with my usual pre-recorded blogs, and also again at the end of the month with these TV and film and book wrap-ups. So I hope you'll join me then. Bye for now, everyone.